Hello, you absolute legends. I know I'm kind of stealing that intro from Carl Jobst and his speedrunning channel, but it just feels like the right introduction to this. Like, that's what I want to call you all because that's what you are, so I'm going to use it as well. Uh, Finally getting around to the video on Cormac, the model I was lucky enough to win Judge's Choice Best in Show at Crimson Dragon. Sorry, not Crimson Dragon. At Crimson Brush, the replacement for Crystal Dragon this year at Cancon. Still going to take a little while to get used to that in the head, I think. Just giving you a quick look around the whole thing before we get into talking a bit about this guy. I'm pretty happy with the result. I mean, there are areas where I think it could be a lot better, but that's just a lack of experience with painting these kind of shadows, and the amount that I learned over the course of the model really was a lot. And I think next time I do it, and there will be a next time, I will I'll hopefully do it better. And I think it's something I'd like to try multiple times because I can see it being like any other technique. The more you use it, the better you can get at it, and the more special the way you use it could be used to really like make certain things about a piece work really well. It's a cool technique, definitely a very cool technique. It's interesting. We got notified of Crimson Brush about 5 weeks before the event, and right at that point in time, I was right in the middle of what you know has been my non-metallic metal journey, and I hadn't really planned for the event or painted a bunch of models that were meant to be entries, and so I thought, which one can I pick to paint to be my entry that will be really just the one and done entry for this year's? Because usually when I'm heading towards Crystal Dragon, or from now on Crimson Brush in January, I try to spend from at least November to December planning and thinking and trying to paint some ideas that might be competition worthy. The rest of my entries weren't exactly competition worthy pieces. I just brought them along because I had them around, so I'm pretty happy with the results that I've gotten overall with all of those, especially considering some of those were a couple of years old, so it was good to be able to show some progression over the years. But let's get more into this guy because I'm sure that's what you're wanting to hear about. The reason I brought up the break from non-metallic metal though is because this model realistically has almost no metal. There's a little bit of metal on his wrist here, and there's a little bit of metal on this, what I assume is maybe a knife or a club or something hanging from his side. I don't think it's a club. He's not a violent person. The way I've painted him is to be a gentle, in touch with nature kind of guy, so probably not that. But anyway, that's beside the point. There's not a lot of metal, and I've been trying to use stippling a lot less in those non-metallic metal pieces. So this is kind of like a complete role reversal piece where you go from everything I haven't been doing recently to everything that I normally do and have been pretty good at. You know, that's the purpose of a competition piece. You do everything you can to the best of your abilities. It was also a learning experience because of the Dappled Light, but I used the areas where I feel most confident with stippling to paint most of the shadows. The areas where the shadows I think don't work as well is when they're in a beard, and that's because I've painted the beard with lines, you know, to make it hair, and to blend those edges of shadow is a lot more difficult when you're using lines than when you're using stipples, because stipples just naturally especially when you've got like the texture of these cloth. I tried to make these a little bit thicker stipples so that this looks like a bit more a rough texture than his shirt, which is a little bit more fine textured. When you're using stipples to blend and blur the kind of shapes of light and shadow, it's a lot easier to do for me with stippling than it is to do on other types of paintings. So it fits right in there. As you can see with the close-ups, it's a lot more stippled. Maybe this is too close on a bust. You lose a lot of the detail, I suppose. Maybe not. Get to see a lot of the inbuilt texture in the model, looking at things this close up. It's interesting. I've only just finished watching the judging stream that Trent and Sebastian did on the weekend, and I thought that was really great. I especially learned a lot from the way that they judged and critiqued the other people's pieces. I've got so many things in my head about things I want to try and learn over the coming years, that I'm really very inspired and looking forward to seeing where that comes from. But they also said that it would have been great to see just a little bit more shadows coming down over his face. And it's absolutely true. I was afraid. I wasn't confident enough in my shadows because I painted this area first, to put enough shadows onto the face. It was also a conscious decision to kind of like keep the shadows away from the main focal point, which is his face, so that you've got like, that dark contrast differences. So there was a bit of that, but I can definitely understand and believe that just a few more leaves and branches just hanging down a little bit more over his forehead would have set things off just that little bit more, which would have been cool to do, but it's not worth going back and changing the piece now. I don't feel it needs to be changed. Next time around, I'll try something more, and I have an idea of which piece to try it on and how I want to do it. Probably be a while from now until then though. So switching back to the little bit further camera, this one works a lot better for busts. You get a lot more of the model in the scene. One day I'm probably going to have to think about investing in a proper background, but I kind of like the way those blurred out paint pots kind of look in the background, so who knows, maybe I won't, maybe I will. Depends on how much I end up wanting to consider growing the channel. Anyway, so I want to try and talk a fair bit into the dappled light and the technique involved and how it was done, and the choices that I made. So I spent a lot of time each day actually planning and practicing using my iPad and an app called Procreate to draw over the photos that I'd taken each time after finishing painting, and actually draw different shapes of leaves and branches on, especially on this arm. I had a lot of trouble getting this to look as convincing as I wanted to. I feel like this area on his chest sort of came together really nicely. This was a lot harder. I had to iterate on this like 3 or 4 times. This one went fairly smoothly, this one smoothly, but here and here I had a fair bit of trouble. I feel like his arms worked fine, and then on these feathers and the shells, they work pretty well as well. So from the very beginning I had a plan. So I used a picture of the model, and I overlaid some silhouettes of trees that I found on Google image search over the image, and that would give me the initial idea of where I wanted the shadows to be and the shapes that I wanted to follow. However, the silhouettes that I found were far too high detail to fit into the size of the model. Like, I had a lot of trouble trying to do some really fine leaves and stuff, which is very different to the way it looks in the silhouette that I originally used. And so I ended up just using it as a general guide, and then using my iPad to sketch in different shapes and try this, try that, try different shapes. I'll put up a picture right now that shows the different stages of the left arm sleeve that's over here, and you can see that it's changed a lot from what I first started on. I had it a much brighter yellow. I always intended to remove a lot of that bright yellow. It was more of just a base to bring in that first picture. And then I spent a fair bit of time just changing. And when you're going to paint this kind of dappled light, which I don't feel like I've achieved to the maximum that it can be done, like it's to me it feels a little bit amateurish. I don't know. I guess that's just because it's an amateurish technique that I'm very, very new to, so that's probably why I feel that way about it. It's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with it. It's convincing. I think it's convincing enough to tell the story without people having to wonder, oh, is it tree or not, or is he standing in the shadow of a tree? It definitely tells the story I want it to, so I'm pretty proud of that. That's not an easy thing to do. And so I deliberately also chose these colours, like this bright yellow, this bright green. I chose those colours because they could have a lot of contrast. There's a lot of range in the colours of green and yellow. The human eye can see the most in that range of colours. So green and green-yellow, that's actually where we can see the most. So it made it a lot easier to create green and green-yellow shadows because you've got more space of value when going from green, green-yellow. So these shadows go from bright green to sort of a more dull green and then down to a blue, and we've got blue down here. And it's a sort of the same thing here. So this is bright yellow and then it goes into the greens, and then we're turning into sort of like olive yellows at the back here to cool down the back and make the back, flat, because the light is coming at him from here. So actually probably it's more like here, coming through the trees. So the back is in shadow. In the past, or if this wasn't a competition piece, I may have left the whole back a lot darker, but I've been reading the Kirill Kanev, sorry, I probably pronounced that wrong, FAQ book from AK Interactive at the moment, and he talks a lot about these models being handed in 3D, and 3D models being the whole purpose of what we're painting, 3D canvases for. So it should look good from all directions if we can. And I'm starting to believe that to be actually important. It's important for me now. There was a period where I didn't think that painting the back was important, so I left it a lot in dark, which if you watch the judging stream, you'll see that I got marked down a couple of times because of that. I think because this back view, it's totally differently visible to the front. It doesn't matter that it might not be exactly the same exposure level to the front. Like realistically, if you were to look at this guy and then have the light on him and then walk around him with the light staying, sorry, I just bumped with the light staying on the right angle from him, the back would end up being very dark, but your eye changes the way that you see light as you move from light to dark. So it's kind of like the same as with a camera. You change the exposure length and the time that you see, so things in the dark become brighter because they're in the dark and because you're looking at them in the dark. I think it makes a lot of sense to go forward doing things like that, and it also allows for like some it's quite appropriate for this model. Like there's this line here where there's really the only poor angle in this model, but whenever you turn it around and look at it, it's blocked by his hand, and then once you get to here, you're starting to get a front rim light, and when you look at it from here, you're getting a rear rim light. So it was appropriately positioned, I think. And this side, the Terminator in shadow works. It just fades into the dark side, and the camera's probably already changing the way that we're perceiving the light just a little bit anyway. So just an interesting thought and something that I'll definitely be taking on as I go ahead. think that about covers everything that I wanted to say. Yeah. I've probably left something out, but we're getting up to 15 minutes, which is one of my longer videos. I'm sure people might have questions about this. It's a difficult technique, and if you'd like to discuss it further, it's something that's really difficult to, just conceptualize in a 15-minute space. I could spend hours and hours talking about dappled light. I could spend a whole year painting nothing but models with dappled light, and I think by the end of that year I might start to properly grasp how to make it work. Like, you've got to think about, especially when using it on a 3D model, you've got to think about how the light will stretch a little bit on these branches that are further away. Like, I'm thinking this branch is poking it towards where the camera is. That's why it's fading away, whereas this leaf on his hand there is closer towards his hand than this leaf is. So I've blurred that out a little bit. Same with this here, and then we're much closer to the trees over on this side, so it's a lot more solid and strong. But you've also got to consider, like, certain leaves should be blurred a little bit because some of them are further away, and you've got different branches from different parts of the trees. So this part here is much closer than this part here. It's coming off towards him. This is going away, but also coming towards, and there's another branch going away. It's so complicated to think about this stuff. A lot of fun though, really complicated, and really cool way to try and learn how to paint shadow. And to think that the first time I tried this, I had so much trouble with it that it almost like made my head explode trying to think about how to make it work. To think that I've learned enough over the years to be able to do this. I'm quite proud of that. Quite proud of how much I've learned, to be honest. And I'm happy with this piece. I think it's one of my better ones, and yeah. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. If you have, I'd be more than happy to chat to anyone who has any questions about dappled light and detailing it further. Maybe one day I'll try and make a tutorial video, but I've got a lot of tutorial videos that I'd like to make one day, and I've said it a few times, but it all comes down to how life goes, whether I have the energy, and these videos are a bit draining for me, so I don't do them as often as I'd probably like to. If everything was right in a perfect world, I'd like to actually make a little summary recap video at the end of every day's painting session and post it and say, this is what I did today, this is what I learned, this is what I'm going to do tomorrow, etc, etc. But we do what we can, I do what I can, and I'm hoping that what I provide in these videos does help you guys out. I've had a lot of great comments and messages about them, so I'm going to keep them going, even if it is just every now and then when I finish a project. So thanks so much for watching. You're absolute legends. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.